Good morning. Yes.
What chapter is this?
This is chapter 16. So, no, 17. Chapter 17.
She's gonna write it down.
Chapter 17.
Positive. Final answer.
100%. Good morning. Good morning. All right, so just an update of where we're at. We're at chapter 17. We're going to start the endocrine system today. I posted chapter 16, the two videos for vision and hearing, or the special senses. And I actually went through and shortened the lecture, condensed the material for chapter 17, so I don't have to put that hormone action. We're going to talk about it today on as a video lecture. We'll actually cover it today. Okay? So those two video lectures are on for special senses. All right, you won't have another one other than the ones I post from today. Okay? So where we're at today, we're going to start the endocrine system. Okay? And what we're going to talk about the endocrine system is this. For now, let me ask you a question. What controls the body? What system controls the body? The nervous system. Okay? The nervous system. Is that it? How many of you say yes? None of you say yes. So what's the other system that helps control the body? The endocrine system. And how does it work? So how does the nervous system control the body? Think about how a neuron works. Sends electrical impulses. Is that fast or slow? Fast. Okay? The endocrine system is kind of that app that's running in the background. Okay? It's running all the time, keeping all the stuff that's going on, your normal computer working in a normal fashion, right? All of those background programs that are running on your iPad, on your computer, whatever. Okay? But it's helping maintain the normal actions of the body. Okay? While the nervous system controls all the other stuff you're doing. Okay? So the endocrine system is composed of what we call ductless glands. All right? It helps maintain homeostasis. We're going to talk about the functions of this in a minute. But it's composed of a numerous ductless glands. All right? That produce and secrete hormones. All right? A hormone is defined as a substance that is released, produced by a gland or cells, that is released and transported through the blood, and it will elicit actions at a target cell. Okay? So hormones are released in the blood and transported throughout the body. How is that different than the nervous system? If a neuron is activated, what does it act on? It's pretty localized, right? A neuron activated has to act on a neuron, right? There's defined pathways. Yes? Okay? There's defined target organs. But if I put a hormone, if a hormone is produced and it travels throughout the blood, what potential targets could that hormone get to? Anything where the blood goes, right? And the blood pretty much goes everywhere. Okay? But, so how, the question then is, well, how do target cells, how do they know they're targeted? Well, they have to have some way of recognizing that hormone. Okay? And how that works is that the target cells have a definitive receptor for that hormone. Okay? So target cells have specific receptors. So they bind to the hormone, and then there's some type of intracellular a response within the cell itself. Okay? So you have endocrine systems are your two, endocrine and nervous systems are the two control systems of the body. Okay? Both systems release ligands. They release something. What does an endocrine gland release? What do we call that ligand? Called a hormone. And what type of ligands do neurons release? Neurotransmitters. Acetylcholine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And we're actually going to talk about epinephrine and norepinephrine. They bridge the gap. Okay? In some cases, they're produced by one of the glands. In other cases, they are produced by neurons. Okay? So they can actually function both as a neurotransmitter and a hormone. Okay? So unlike the nervous system, the endocrine system transmits ligands through the blood, right, rather than directly from synaptic knobs. They can target any cell, like Jake said, that as long as it has the correct receptors. Okay? It also exhibits longer reaction times. What's the speed of stimulation in terms of the nervous system? Quick, right? Real quick. You hear something, you react to it. You see something, you react to it. Okay? Endocrine system is longer reaction time. Why? Think about what has to happen. It has to be a stimulus for the endocrine glands to stimulate hormonal release or hormonal production. The hormone has to be released into the blood, and then it has to go to its target organs, and the target organs have to do something in response. That's a lot longer than a neuronal electrical impulse. You know, the lights come on, boom, there's a stimulation and a reaction. Okay? But with that, it also has longer lasting effects. Minutes to days to weeks. All right? So it has a longer lasting effect. Okay, so here's a little comparison. You have a neuron, okay, target cells. They both have target cells, right? Whether they be effectors or glands in nervous system, or whatever cell has receptors in the endocrine system. Difference, how do those ligands travel to the target cells, okay, via the blood. And here's a little table comparing the two. And this is in your book, right? But really compare and contrast nervous system versus endocrine system, right? How communication, transport method occurs, right? What's the defining characteristic of the endocrine system? Hormones travel through the, all together now, because just to make sure you're awake. Blood. Thank you. Okay? And then we have targets. Presence of the receptor is absolutely necessary. Okay? There's plenty of research that shows that there's hormonal effects that are not receptor mediated, but in this case, for anatomy and physiology, we're going to concentrate on the receptor mediated responses. Devin.
So do females and males have different receptors because they have different hormone levels?
They have different, well, so there's two things that you're saying right there. They have two different hormone levels and two different receptors, or different types of receptors. Mainly, they have two different hormonal levels of hormone. So females tend to have a higher estrogen, right, than males because they produce more estrogen during their menstrual cycle, and males have a lower level and they produce testosterone. So they have different, but they also have different cell types that are targeted by that. So they may have different.
Does that affect someone being transgender?
Well, let's talk about it. So during gender modification, there is a hormonal difference. They take hormones to change their gender, right? So let's say a male transitioning to a female would take more female hormones and would develop female structures, right? That in order for that to happen, there still has to be estrogen receptors on their cells, and they have that. It's just a matter of they have lowered amounts of hormone normally, I guess biologically normal. Okay? Other questions? Okay? And here's locations and names of most of your major endocrine glands. You should identify these, and you'll actually see that some of these we'll talk about in terms of endocrine function today, and some of them, really their endocrine function is related to other things. Okay? Parathyroid glands are in the back, small, 4 to 6 of them that are on the posterior surface of the thyroid. The thyroid helps control metabolism. That's a butterfly-shaped thing. We'll talk about each of these more specifically. Thyroid's in the neck. The adrenal gland sits on top of the kidney. You have the thymus, which is this little thing right here. It's smaller in adults. It's much larger in infants. It reduces in size over time because it's less important. It's important for the development of T cells that are mainly present, we'll say during infancy and childhood. As you get older, it gets smaller. The pituitary gland and the hypothalamus in the brain, along with the pineal gland. The skin is an endocrine organ. Skin produces vitamin D, which can be considered a hormone. The heart, okay, can be considered an endocrine organ, or at least it has an endocrine function to it. Okay, we're going to talk about the heart in terms of cardiovascular next semester. The liver, part of that has an endocrine function, right? It produces hormone that actually targets cells throughout the body. Okay, the stomach, the pancreas. The pancreas is really is one of the biggest, most pronounced organ that has a distinctive endocrine function and a separate exocrine function. Okay? And then we have adipose tissue, kidneys, and then the gonads, the testes, and the ovaries. Now, I've been talking about endocrine, and I mentioned just now exocrine. What does endocrine mean? What does that word mean? There's not endorse. We have endo. I said exo. And then we break the word into another part. Not that. The suffix crine. Autocorrect. All right? What does endo mean? In or within. What does exo mean? Out or outside. What does crine mean? Okay, hormone secretion. Okay? So when we compare endocrine within secretion, crine secretion, endo within, so that secretion that's produced, hormones, stay within the body. And then exocrine or exocrine, that secretion somehow ends up outside of the body. So the pancreas, as we talk about it, has an endocrine function, produces something that stays inside the body, and has an exocrine function, produces other stuff that actually ends up outside of the body. So the pancreas produces insulin and glucagon, which stay inside and target cells within the body. It also produces digestive enzymes that help break down food and eventually exit outside of the body. Okay, so that's a comparison of the endocrine versus exocrine function. Okay, so in order for endocrine organs to work, they have to produce what? Exactly, hormones. They have to produce hormones. I know it's Wednesday, and come on, people, you can do it. Okay? So there's a couple different. So what causes hormone release from endocrine glands? What stimulates a gland or the cells within the gland to produce hormones? There's 3 different types of stimulation. Hormonal stimulation, a hormone binds to the cells within an organ and induces those cells to produce a second hormone. Right? So, example, anterior pituitary releases a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. All right? That targets the thyroid to produce thyroid hormone, also known as thyroxine, also known as T3/T4. We'll talk about that later. Okay? So thyroid hormone, which then goes to the body and has multiple target organs from there. Okay? There's also what we call humoral stimulation. Okay? Humoral. There's something that triggers a level of something, okay, triggers the organ to produce a hormone. The best example is in the case of blood sugar. Okay? So I woke up this morning, had a nice bowl of Golden Grams for breakfast, followed that with a Pop-Tart, and then on the way to work, I was falling asleep, so I had a Mountain Dew. I didn't really do that, okay? But let's talk about my blood sugar on the way in. What happened? It elevates, okay? And in response to that elevated blood sugar, elevated amount of glucose in the blood, what does my pancreas do? It releases insulin, okay? That is a change in the level of sugar in the blood. Okay, this is humoral stimulation of the pancreas to produce insulin. Change in blood sugar. So blood sugar goes up, it produces insulin. Blood sugar goes down, the pancreas produces a second hormone called glucagon. What's the point in order to keep what's the goal? Homeostasis. Homeostasis of what? Blood sugar. Keep blood sugar at a normal level. Okay? That's humoral stimulation. And then finally, we have nervous system stimulation. A neuron, some stimulus through a neuron, electrical stimulus, right, release of neurotransmitter, then stimulates the release of a hormone into the blood. Example, sympathetic nervous system input. Okay? Sympathetic nervous system fight or flight causes the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream, which then targets a number of organs. Okay? So in this case, norepinephrine and epinephrine are considered hormones because they're released from the adrenal medulla into the blood, and they work at a number of target organs. Okay? Questions on the types of stimulation that is involved in eliciting the synthesis and release of hormones? Good. Let's talk about types of hormones. There are basically 3 distinct types of hormones. We have steroids, biogenic amines, and proteins. Okay? Steroids. They are base. They are lipid soluble. Why do you think that's important? Why am I mentioning that? As opposed to the other 2 that are water soluble.
They can get through the phospholipid bilayer.
They can get through the bilayer. Okay? The water-soluble ones cannot. They're polar. Well, except for thyroid hormone. Okay? So, because they can't get through the bilayer easily, there are 2 distinct ways, mechanisms of action of these hormones. Okay? If they can get through the bilayer, they can just go through and they can bind to the receptor inside the cell. Where does the receptor have to be if they can't get through the bilayer? Has to be on the outside of the cell, on the cell membrane. Okay? Steroid hormones include what? Estrogen, progesterone. What else? Testosterone, cortisol. Aldosterone is also a steroid hormone, right? Aldosterone works in maintaining fluid balance in the body. Okay, biogenic amines, water soluble. They're basically a modified amino acid, right? And include norepinephrine, epinephrine, thyroid hormone, and the one we all really like come bedtime, melatonin. Sleepy, sleepy. Okay? Just like you are all right now. No, you're not. All right, and then proteins, water soluble. Right? Most hormones are proteins. Okay? They could be broken down into 3 subgroups. We're not going to get into them. Small peptides, large polypeptides, and then glycoproteins. What is a glycoprotein? What does glyco have to do with? Fiona? Sugar. Okay? Sugar. So there's a sugar that's involved with this. So most of those hormones work the way you think. They target the whole body. But there are some hormones that act what we call more locally. They don't necessarily circulate in the blood. Didn't I just say that kind of went against the idea of what a hormone is? But then again, they're not neurotransmitters either. So there's kind of this, what we call a local hormone. Okay? And there's some debate whether or not biologists actually classify these as hormones or not. But it's a type of local hormone, all right? Eicosanoids are a type of local hormone that's formed from fatty acids within the phospholipid bilayer of a membrane. Right? So there's this enzymatic cascade that breaks down the phospholipid that's present in the fatty acids and then produce something else. Okay? And this is called a prostaglandin. Okay? Prostaglandins are eicosanoids and they have all of these different effects. In some cases, prostaglandins have a very large effect. Okay? Localized effect. Okay, a prostaglandin that's very important in humans is one that's called PGF2 alpha. Prostaglandin F2 alpha. Okay? And it's synthesized through this cascade, break down arachidonic acid, and there's enzymes that break it down and produce the prostaglandins. And if you inhibit those enzymes, then you inhibit the production of the prostaglandin. And what does the prostaglandin do? Binds to its receptor, and in some cases it causes inflammation. Okay? In some cases it causes blood vessel constriction. Okay? Some cases it causes blood vessel dilation. Prostaglandins have a multitude of different effects depending upon the tissue you're looking at. Okay? So you have and down here in this, I'll move this over so you can see it out of the thing. You have prostaglandins, thromboxanes, and leukotrienes. Those are all hormones that have local effects where they are. Okay? PGF2 alpha is one I mentioned because it is, if you inhibit that specific prostaglandin in the ovary, you can stop ovulation. Okay? So that is a specific example. So ovulation is a very localized phenomenon. It only happens in the ovary, right? It's not controlled by a hormone that's throughout the whole body. It's very localized. But in that area, if you can stop prostaglandin in that specific area of the ovary, you can prevent or delay ovulation. Okay? Questions on local hormones? Okay? In some cases, they have what's called paracrine or autocrine stimulation. Go back to this crine idea. Okay? So autocrine versus paracrine. I'm just going to show you this, and we'll put autocrine over here, and we'll put paracrine over here. And here's our happy cells. Okay? I'm going to have a little nuclei. All right, so now this cell is going to produce a hormone. And on that cell, it also has a lovely receptor, whatever it might be. Okay? So this autocrine basically says this cell produces the hormone, and the hormone is actually going to act right on that cell. The cell produces the hormone and then elicits the response right on. Autocrine. Auto means self. Paracrine means next to. All right? Or near. So in this case, this cell is going to produce the hormone. This cell has the receptor. Ooh, the receptor is this way. And so this hormone is going to work on a nearby cell. Localized, right? Autocrine, paracrine. What is not present here? What are we missing in terms of a hormone? Bloodstream, right? This is not long distance away, okay? And you can further break down paracrine in what we call juxtacrine, a cell that's right next to, juxtaposed, right next to the other one. Yes, adjacent.
Will the receiving cell also make its own hormone that, like, the original cell?
It's quite possible. All right, so so you're saying that, you know, this cell could then produce a hormone that works on this one, right? Yes. All right, but that would be another example of a paracrine mechanism. Or this cell could produce a hormone that goes, you know, in the bloodstream or whatever.
So it's not like only producers and only receivers?
No. Okay, so whatever happens, whatever the response to that hormone is just a matter of whether or not the receptor is there. Okay, and it can produce another hormone beyond that. Okay, so prostaglandins, we said, are eicosanoids. They stimulate pain and mainly inflammatory responses. So aspirin and other non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, Advil, Tylenol, Aleve, Motrin, all of those, they target a lot of these enzymes that produce the prostaglandins. Okay, so what we call phospholipase A as an example. Phospholipase is an enzyme that is targeted by aspirin and NSAIDs in order to stop the production of prostaglandins, which then leads to breakdown of stop inflammation and can stop pain. Okay, or increased blood vessel dilation and will help headaches go away. Okay? Hormones are transported by the blood, and the blood is what type of fluid? What is it mainly made up of? Water. So our lipid-soluble hormones that are present, they may have a problem being transported in the blood because they're hydrophobic. Okay? So they don't dissolve in blood, so they have to be transported by proteins, carrier proteins. Carrier proteins that are water-soluble can bind to the lipid molecules and allow them to be transported in the blood. Okay? And then there's a whole binding kinetics, right, between the carrier protein and the hormone. Most of the hormone is bound, and some of it is unbound, what we call free. And you may have heard of this, and when if you're watching football, you talk about free testosterone versus bound testosterone. It goes through the commercials of Nugenics, et cetera, like that. If you actually hear these things, percent free testosterone is necessary to cause secondary sex characteristics, et cetera. Okay, but it's just amount of it that is able to be free, unbound to carrier molecules, and they can bind to other receptors at target organs. And then your water-soluble hormones, they can move freely. Insulin, glucagon, right? Those are protein molecules. They are water-soluble. They move freely throughout the blood because they dissolve in the plasma of blood. Excuse me. Some of them do use binding proteins that help extend their lifespan, right? Their half-life. So IGF, insulin-like growth factor, right, extends through, is bound in the blood in what we call IGF-BPs, IGF binding proteins, which help extend its lifespan and eventually the action. So what affects the levels of circulating hormone in the body? So how much melatonin do you have going through your body right now? What is that dependent upon? How much thyroid hormone do you have going through your body? What does it depend upon? Well, it depends upon how much is made by the cells that produce it, and then how much your body can break it down and it be eliminated. Okay? So the cells that produce it, what's the stimulation to produce the hormone, and then how well does your body break it down, how is it used, broken down, and then eliminated by the liver? Because the liver is basically like your trans key.
Would your level of melatonin be dependent upon your circadian rhythm?
Absolutely.
Or is your circadian rhythm dependent on the level of melatonin?
They are related. So they somewhat they're in what we call interdependent. Okay? So, hormone synthesis and hormone elimination. So it's kind of like how much is being added to the system versus how much is being taken away is equal to what's left in the system. That's your amount of hormone left in the blood. Okay? And for that we can calculate what we call the half-life. The time necessary to reduce a hormone's concentration to half of its original level. Okay, so how long it's going to go through the body, start at X number, how long does it take to get to X divided by 2? Right? Water-soluble hormones generally are less, they have a shorter half-life than typically lipid-soluble, right? Example, testosterone has a half-life of 12 days, right? And part of the reason that they have that longevity is the carrier proteins that bring them around. Okay, so 12 days. This is really a measurement of how long hormones stay in the blood. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that every 12 days a person has half the amount of testosterone they have. No, because they're continually making. Okay? Just a matter of how much. All right, so talked about lipid-soluble hormones. Let's talk about how they work. Okay? Because they are relatively small, they are nonpolar and lipophilic, because they're lipid-soluble, we said they can pass easily across the membrane, right? Across the bilayer. So in order for that, because that happens, their receptor does not have to be on the cytoplasmic membrane. It can be inside the cell. And when it's inside the cell, it actually then allows for a different mechanism of action. Okay? So I'm just going to draw this out real quick. So here's our cell membrane. I could draw the lipids and go on from there. Okay? Here's our hormone. And I'm drawing it just testosterone real quick because I know the structure of it basically. Basically off the structure of cholesterol. Okay? So there's our hormone. And our receptor is going to be in here. So this is the androgen receptor. It's one of them when I did my PhD on. Okay? And now what's going to end up happening, this freely goes across. So it goes across the membrane, right? The androgen receptor binds the hormone. Okay? Now this is the nucleus. And when it binds the hormone, a second androgen receptor binds, dimerizes, goes to the nucleus, and then binds to DNA and produces an mRNA from there. Okay? So it's kind of a very linear response. Hormone enters cell, binds to receptor, receptor then dimerizes and goes to target genes inside the nucleus, and you get production of those genes that are responsive to estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, whatever hormone we started with. Right? They're responsive to that hormone. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay? That is what we call the classical response, the classical lipid steroid hormone mechanism of action. Okay? Very straightforward. This is what it looks like in your book. Whoa, that's okay. Settle down. Right? Hormone, unbound, crosses the membrane, binds to the receptor, hormone receptor complex. You get, there's the hormone receptor. They don't show the dimerization, localizes to the nucleus, binds to the DNA, and then you get mRNA and the production of hormone responsive proteins. Straightforward. Okay? Now, all of those, there's multiple proteins that could be responsive from that. You can go on and on and on, but it's very straightforward. Okay? Hormone binds the receptor, receptor then causes transcription of genes. Good, I'm glad we're good with that. Yes? Awesome. Now I'm going to use the snout out of you. Because water-soluble pathway. Water-soluble means that they're polar and they cannot cross the membrane. So where does the receptor have to be? In the membrane facing to the outside. Okay? And then from there, we have to have some type of what we call a signal transduction pathway. The ultimate goal is to have the cell to do some type of response. But if the trigger, the stimulus of that response, can't get into the cell, there has to be some way of relaying the message from the outside to the inside. Okay? And this is what we call a second messenger system. All right? So the first messenger is the original hormone. Then it binds to its receptor, and then what? It's not going to come inside the cell, but somehow that message has to be relayed inside the cell. Okay? And that was now the binding of the receptor to the hormone activates a number of different second messenger systems. One of which is called a G protein or G protein coupled receptor. Okay? Now, a G protein or G proteins are internal membrane proteins that bind guanine nucleotide, and then they activate and they can do different things. They might activate another enzyme. They may have an enzyme activity on their own. They may start production of chemicals inside the cell. There's a whole nother thing, right? But what ends up happening is this. You get the production of a second messenger. Now that message is relayed and something's happening inside the cell that transmits the message from the original hormone inside the cell. First messenger, second messenger. Okay? Is this different than the steroid hormone pathway? The lipid soluble? Yes, it is, right? Much different. So this is what it looks like. Here's G protein coupled receptors. Okay? Here you have your receptor inside the membrane just hanging out, binds to its hormone, right? Its respective hormone. There's the first message, and now that binding triggers activation of this G protein. Okay? This activated G protein then can do something from there. Okay? In some cases, this G protein is the second messenger. In other cases, this G protein is actually associated with the receptor, and now it causes activation of another thing called, let's say, other enzymes, adenyl cyclase, right, which produces cyclic AMP, right, or phospholipase A, which produces an inositol triphosphate, or diacylglycerol, right? Those are all chemicals that are inside the cell that can make the cell do something else. Those are examples of second messengers. Okay? Second messengers. So the activation of the G protein is what? Is the transfer of GDP for GTP, guanine triphosphate. Similar in structure and name as adenosine triphosphate, right? So it's a triphosphate, a trinucleotide. Okay, so now you see this right here, the adenine. Here's the adenylate cyclase pathway, right? I just call it adenyl cyclase. That's the enzyme. So here's the receptor was over here, right? Bound to its hormone and activated this G protein. So that was what's left over from the previous slide. The activated G protein then stimulates adenyl cyclase, and they get the production of protein kinase A and other enzymes. PKA. PKA is then going to produce an IP2 and diacylglycerol from IP3. Right? So a kinase, what does a kinase do? You don't remember that from Bio 1? Kinase is an enzyme that phosphorylates proteins. It adds a phosphate group. Okay? Actually, we talked about this when we talked about cell respiration. Right? We had glucose, fructose 1,6 biphosphate. Right? And that's a kinase that actually adds a phosphate enzyme, a phosphate group. So when it adds a phosphate to a protein, it activates it. So there's a signal transduction, a cascade of reactions that occurs. So if I have the next protein, right, a phosphate's going to be added here, and that's going to be activated. And then maybe that then activates the next protein. And then that one becomes activated by another phosphate or something, and then so on. So I have a signaling cascade. One activated protein targets the next protein to activate it, and on and on and on. Eventually getting to the nucleus in order to induce transcription of genes that are targeted by that hormone, that are responsive to that hormone. So the ultimate goal is the same, to get the message to the nucleus to start transcription of genes, right? But lipid-soluble hormones have an easier route than water-soluble hormones because of the nature of of the hormone itself. Okay, because they can't get through the membrane. Here, and I take this particular cascade, right? So if I have this protein right here targets this one, but what if it targeted another one? And then this one becomes activated as well, and then targets 2 more proteins that then become activated. What have I done? I've taken one receptor molecule that's been activated, and now I've activated how many different pathways inside the cell? 4. And that's just to say there's only 2 targets. What if there were 5 targets? What we have now is amplification of the signal. Okay? We can amplify the signal all at once. That's a very... All right, and then we have this whole phospholipase C pathway, and I don't want, this is not going to be on the exam in terms of, oh, what's on, what does phospholipase C do? Understand that you should know that diacylglycerol and IP3 are second messengers, okay? In the case of epinephrine, it binds to its receptor, activates the G protein, and then you get intracellular concentrations of diacylglycerol and IP3 go up, because those are your second messengers. More of that then leads to phosphorylates other molecules. Okay? So diacylglycerol then binds to protein kinase PKC, and PKC then activates other molecules. What's the benefit of this? What's the benefit of this transduction pathway? So if I go back to an aspect of this, okay, and you see PKC pathway, we're not going to. Here's what happens, right? So you can see kind of what's happening here. Notice right here, you have your activated protein kinase enzymes. A calcium is a second messenger in this case. Sometimes hormones induce muscle contraction. Okay? Diacylglycerol is a second messenger. IP3 is a second messenger, as is calcium. Calcium can go in open ion channels. Right? So there's, not only is there an amplification of the signal, there's also what we call a diversification of the signal. It's not just activating and going transcribing enzymes. It's also doing other stuff in the cell, making it more permeable, making it different reactions. Questions on that? All right. On Friday, we'll pick slide.